Alright, how's it going, guys? So, I'm just going to be bringing you a quick guide for the n6m4 today build for Demon Hunter. There's a couple different variants. There's like cold and fire that you see on the leaderboards right now. This one's specifically probably going to be for hardcore, but it can be translated to softcore. I'll just roll through the gear and the rolls and everything, and then you can do with it what you will. So I'm equipped with cold variant right now. The N6 means Natalya's 6-piece for those that don't know. And then M4 stands for Marauders 4-piece. So technically we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Natalya's pieces, and then 1, 2, 3 Marauders pieces. Now obviously there's 6, you need 6, so we have the Ring of Royal Grandeur in the cube. And then because I'm using the cold variant, I've got Frostburns in the cube. And then you always have Manticore. The only thing that changes between the cold and fire build, if you're using fire, you just equip Cinder Coat instead, or whatever here in that slot. But because I'm using cold, like I said, that's the setup I've got. I'm using a cold amulet, Traveler's Pledge, and Wraps Clarity with cold on them just for extra elemental damage. But anyways, I'll go through that in a few seconds. Now, common misconception sometimes with this build, there's a lot of variants like in the pieces that you can use. The only couple pieces that you're absolutely locked into is you have to use a Natalya's Slayer in order to get the 6-piece for Natalya's, just because there's no other way to do it. Like, you're locked into using the weapon, and you have to use a Natalya's Ring. So you need those 2 pieces for sure. And then your other slot is always going to be Compass Rose and a Traveler's Pledge. So those are the only pieces you're absolutely locked into, other than, your Bombardier's Rucksack for sentry damage. Zoe's you could even change if you wanted Witching Hour or whatever. Wouldn't recommend it. Usually most everyone uses Zoe's, but you could use Witching, and then like the Wraps Clarity as well, just for damage reduction. So yeah, these are the ones you absolutely have to use for Natalya's, and then you can just mix and match any Marauders and Natalya's pieces in the other slots, as long as they add up to 5 wearing 5 Natalya's pieces and wearing 3 Marauders pieces. So because I got really good Natalya's boots, I chose to wear Natalya's boots. These are the ideal rolls, and as you can see, it's primal. These are fucking amazing. They rolled absolutely perfect. You want Dex Vit, All Res Cluster for Demon Hunter. That's just the best rolls. The most important things, stat priority, you want Cluster Arrow for sure. All Res is really good if you have armor or something. It's fine, but you want the Dex and Vit for sure in the Cluster. The All Res can be armor, whatever else, it's all good.
I understand. I'm not for everyone.
Now, because these are the best pants I got, if I'd gotten good Natalya's pants, I'd wear those, but because I got good Marauders pants, I'm wearing them. And same thing, it's Dex Vit All Res is the best you can get. And then if you want the secondary, Life per Kill is always good. I got Life per Kill too, so that's good. That's why I'm wearing them. Zoe's Secret, mine didn't roll ideal, but it did roll, as you can see, 8.9 out of the 9% secondary. That's the most important thing. And then ideal rolls would be Dex Vit percent life like I have here, but I have regenerates life. All Res would be better, but that's just the way this one rolled, so that's what I'm using. Natalya's Ring, you want crit, and then probably either area damage or resource cost or average damage. This one rolled attack speed. Attack speed's still good. It inflates your sheet a little bit, so it's fine, and helps you attack a little bit faster. You could check breakpoint charts. I'm not really sure about it. But yeah, this is just the best one I've got, so that's what I'm using. Natalya's Gloves. Same thing. Best stat priority is probably the way I've got them rolled right now. Crit area damage. Just because it is an area damage based build for clearing trash through the rift and everything. If you had, Vit or something else, that's fine too. You're just losing a little bit of area. it's whatever, but this is probably the ideal rose. Dex crit area. But they could be Marauders gloves, you know. Obviously, if you had better Marauders gloves, etc., you just supplement other pieces. Marauders Carpus could be Natalya's chest as well. This is just the best one I've got. I've got Dex Fit, and then you want sentry damage on it, because the important thing to note in this build is your sentries are going to be the things doing the damage, not yourself. So the cluster you are firing doesn't really do shit. It's all your sentries. It's more of like a pet build. So your sentries are going to be the ones doing the damage. So you want sentry damage. You can get it on your chest, and you can also get it on your shoulders. These shoulders are maybe not ideal. You do usually want like dex, area damage, resource cost, sentry, but mine just rolled with it. It's kind of whatever. I'm just losing a little bit of area, but you know, I've got area other places, so this is fine. I just get a little bit more toughness, especially in hardcore. It's okay. But yeah, you want the sentry damage noted on the chest and the shoulders, no matter what pieces you're using, whether it's Natalya's chest or Marauder's chest, and then the Marauder's shoulders. I'm using Natalya's helm. Again, could be Marauder's helm, but because I got an amazing Natalya's helm, mine rolled perfect. It's primal, dex, crit hit chance, and cluster arrow damage. That's why I'm using it. Ideally, I'd have a secondary res on it too, but it doesn't have one, but it's just too good not to use, so I'm using that. And those are the ideal rolls. If you had dex vit or whatever, and you'd have to choose between cluster and crit hit chance, you'd probably have to D3 planner it. I think personally crit hit chance I think is better, but some people say cluster. But I mean, cluster usually equates, at least I know in the Marauders build, to about 2% crit hit chance, so technically it'd be weighted a little bit more, but I'm not sure how it works in this build as much, just because it is the sentries doing the damage, not yourself. So I do think crit hit chance might be better, but don't quote me on it. So it's personal choice, one or the other. I like this just because it inflates the sheet, multiplies over the area damage. If you were going to choose, I'd probably choose crit. And then lastly, we've got the Traveler's Pledge and Compass Rose. I'm using the cold variant, like I said. So I've got cold on this one. It's a really good amulet. It's crit, and cold. If you're using fire, you'd want crit, fire. The crit's the most important thing, like crit hit chance, crit hit damage probably. And then lastly, you know, if you can get that extra elemental boost, that's great. Other things that'd be okay would be area damage if you really wanted, average damage if it was like kind of ancient, or dex is fine too, you know, it's all good, but this one's really good, so that's what I'm using. If you're rolling fire, you just roll with fire, obviously. And then lastly, I got Compass Rose here. Again, this is like really ideal. I got really lucky on my pieces. It's non-ancient, but it's crit, area damage, and dex. So I just rolled off the movement speed for crit hit chance because it rolled with crit hit damage and area damage. These are probably the ideal rolls. Again, you could go with crit average damage if it rolled that way. You could go with crit resource cost. There's lots of variances. It just depends how you're statted. I really wanted extra area damage because it was lacking it on other pieces, so this was really good for me. So that's why I'm using it. And that's pretty much the gear for the most part, other than the rucksack here. Ideally, you'd probably want the best rolls would be like dex, elite damage, attack speed, crit hit chance, and then probably area damage, and then as high a sentry damage as possible. As you can see, I'm not done rolling mine. It's only at 94. You do want to try and get it as close to 100 as you can get it, just because it's a sentry-based build, so we want as much sentry damage as you can. Like, you'd think of it this way. For every sentry you're placing down, we place 5 in this build, because we're using custom engineering as a passive. So that's 5 sentries, so every percent sentry you get is really like 5% damage. So if I'm missing 6, like I said right now, on 94 instead of 100, I'm missing 6% damage times 5. It's like 30% damage. So it's a huge damage loss. You really, really want to pay attention to the sentry damage. Some people have been using a lot lower, I've seen on leaderboards, and like this, it's just not good. Like you really want high sentry damage. And then lastly, like discipline in the last slot if you can get it, and like, you know, discipline here on the secondary. But you know, this is the way mine rolled for now, so that's what I got. That's what I'm using. And the Nat Slayer, I forgot. So this one, you want as high a top end as you can possibly get. Mine did roll fairly ideal. I would want discipline as a secondary if I could get it, but this one didn't roll it. And you want percent damage, probably dexterity. I rolled attack speed on mine. You could go with elite damage as well, and resource cost reduction is really, really good for this build too, so mine rolled really well. There's a lot of different variances for this one, but ideally the best one you could possibly get would probably look a lot like this, or you could roll off the attack speed for elite damage or whatever. You know, like I just chose attack speed because I like attack speed, but yeah, it's personal preference really. What else? Yeah, so you want resource cost reduction in your helm for a gem, just because you're going to be popping off a lot of clusters, so resource cost anywhere we can get it is really good. We got 10 here. Got the gem in here. You're going to want to use all res gems for sure in your gear just to make yourself tougher. And then your passives you're going to want. If you're using cold, I've got ballistics, call of the week, custom engineering, and just because I'm in hardcore, I'm using awareness. If you weren't in hardcore, you could switch this for steady aim or ambush or single out or whatever. There's lots of different variances. And then if you're using fire, you could drop ballistics for any of those things the same if you're doing fire. My bar setup, you're going to use Vault Tumble, just so you can have more tumbles to get around in the Rift. Rain of Vengeance, no matter you're using cold or fire, is going to be Flying Strike. This freezes enemies and everything when you cast it. And you're going to want to keep this up because that's what's triggering your damage buffs and reduction, so we're going to always want to make sure we're casting this on cooldown as quick as possible. Evasive Fire, just to generate hatred focus rune no matter which variants you're using, just because this gives us 7 hatred and it's really good, so we use that just to regen hatred. Sentry, again, whether you're using cold or fire, we're using Polar Station. The reason why we use Polar Station, is because we want to slow enemies, so you put them in strategic positions at intersections and on top of mobs and behind and everything, just so that we're slowing enemies and so the turrets are also firing down the line. But we always use polar, whether it's cold or fire variants we're using. Companion, for hardcore you could use boar. I'm using wolf just because I like all out damage. You'd use that in softcore too. No matter fire or cold, you're going to use wolf probably, or boar, depending on whether you're softcore or hardcore, just for that extra damage buff or all res and reduction. We're using cold, like I said before, so our cluster arrow is Maelstrom cold, just because it fires off 650% damage and releases 3 rockets, which synergizes with our ballistics. So they do extra damage, and then we gain 2% life per enemy hit too, so it's really good for regen. So for hardcore, it's really, really good. Helps keep us alive. If you're using the fire variant, all you change is you'd use loaded for bear instead, and it does 850% versus the 650 or whatever from this. So yeah, that's pretty much the build. That's the passives and everything. The way you play it, you just make sure you're always, as soon as you get into a rift, you put your sentries up as fast as possible. You know, you get to 3, and then you want to get all the way to 5 as quickly as possible. They do shoot with you, so like the sentries are doing the damage, like we're not actually doing the damage, so they'll be firing in the rift with you. You want to place them at strategic places, like, you know, intersections and stuff, so that they have to fire in line of sight, and they will fire fairly far, so you want to make sure that you're placing them strategically to slow mobs, and also so that they can shoot like along the path that you're walking. And then other than that, like I said, you're casting this on cooldown, your flying strike, and then we're using our cluster arrow and our evasive fire to help cool down our vengeance, because our 6-piece or our 2-piece Natalia reduced the cool rain of vengeance by 4 seconds after hitting with a hatred generator or spender. So that's helped cools down your vengeance really quick, and that helps keeps our damage buff and reduction up. The Rain of Vengeance itself doesn't really do any damage. That's why you roll it off if you can on your Natalia Slayer. As you can see, mine doesn't have it here. So the 4-piece, the Rain of Vengeance dealing 100% increased damage doesn't really mean shit for us. It's all about the 6-piece. So you see, it's after casting Rain of Vengeance, it deals 3,500% increased damage and takes 60% reduced damage for 10 seconds. So you have to make sure you're getting this buff up every 10 seconds, along with keeping your turrets up for damage and everything. Otherwise, you're going to get hit really, really hard. The 2-piece Marauders gives you all the companions. It's just kind of a bonus. And then the 4-piece Marauder set is sentries deal 400% increased damage and cast either Elemental Arrow, Chakram, Impale, Multi-Shot, and Cluster Arrow when you do. So that's what's helping us do the damage. They're doing 400% increased damage, and then they're getting the buff from the 6-piece 3,500% boost, so that's why the sentries do so much damage. You can pretty much hide and like shoot at a wall, pretty much. It's like the old Marauders build, and like the turrets will shoot for you, they'll auto-target, you just gotta make sure that you place them in strategic positions. That's pretty much the build. The gems you use are Trapped, Enforcer, and Zaze. Again, you could take one of them out, I suppose, if you wanted. If you really felt like you needed more toughness, you could take out Zaze and put in an Esoteric or whatever, something else. You could play with them a bit, but I'd always probably keep Enforcer just because it is a pet build. And Trapped, I would recommend still just using these gems and getting used to the build, but you can change it like depending on the person, your playstyle. I use Kool-Aid just to break walls and everything while we're in Rift, and other than that, I think that's about it. If you have any questions or comments or anything, feel free to leave them below, and I hope this is a helpful guide for you guys, and we'll see you around. If you have any questions, you can also check me out at twitch.tv/untamedgirth, and have fun hunting demons, guys.